Enzo, we can't hear you.
It's always as usual. There's always a missing piece here. Everyone, how are you? This is Enzo from Funnel TV. I'm here today with a very great session. Actually, I would say this is a very exclusive session. We have Scott from AirDNA and Nadine from Aita Insight. We are going to share some interesting stats, insights, and trends on specific market in Europe. We are focusing on 5 cities today: Paris, Amsterdam, Berlin, London, and Barcelona. So before we start the session, I will pass the word to my colleague Christoph, who can introduce a little bit our guest today. How are you, Christoph?
I'm great. Hello, good morning, or almost good morning from Canada. Thank you very much for being here, everyone, today. As Enzo said, two very, very special guests, Nadine from OTA Insight and Scott from AirDNA. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to the audience? Nadine, tell us a little bit about yourself and OTA Insight.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Perfect. Well, hi, everyone. It's a real honor to be on the show today. So thanks for the introduction already. And like Christoph said, I work for OTA Insights. We provide business intelligence to hotels to take basically better revenue management and distribution decisions. So we provide software that ranges from a very extensive rate shopper over to a parity manager to make sure the right rates that you've already compared to your competition are also distributed correctly across all channels. And the latest kid on the block, you can say, is Revenue Insight, where we basically pull all of your performance data out of your PMS and bring them to life into a very visual, easy-to-use dashboard. So we have a threefold product suite right now. And I joined the company in August last year, so I'm a rather fresh addition. And I'm looking after the latest research and development efforts that I will also share some insights of with you today. And I'm really, very excited to do that.
Cool.
That's great. Thank you very much, Nadine. Scott, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and AirDNA.
Great. I'm Scott Shatford, founder and CEO of AirDNA. And we have a company fairly similar to OTA Insights, but we focus solely on the vacation rental industry, mostly on Airbnb, HomeAway, VRBO properties. And what we've developed over the last 5 years is the ability to do partnerships, just like OTA Insights, with PMSs and property managers to acquire about 400,000 properties reservation data, as well as scraping and analyzing all the data from Airbnb and VRBO on a daily basis. So we analyze about 10 million properties every single day, and have really built out technology to understand. And vacation rentals are complicated because they're not always available for rent. They're not full-time rentals. And so we built a lot of technology to really understand vacation rentals like hotels. What is their demand? What is their ADR and occupancy, and all those fun hospitality metrics for that space? So we cover the entire planet. We have market intelligence reports on our website for 80,000 different cities around the world. We really focus on the vacation rental operator, people looking to manage the properties, do revenue management, analyze competition, benchmark their performance, all those fun things that you do with data and analytics. So that's a brief background on what we do.
Thank you very much. That's very fascinating. All right. For everyone who doesn't know this, but we have planned this session already a long time ago. I think it was maybe a couple of months or longer. So when we started planning out this session, the world looked very differently from what it looks like now. Why don't we take it away a little bit to have a look at what data tells us and see what we can conclude from trends and developments. Nadine, do you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Let me just see if Enzo would like to share my screen on my behalf. Amazing, great. So let's dive right in. The first city we would like to look at actually is pretty much the poster child of Europe, I would say, Paris, having the probably still the very highest rate we've even seen in any city in Europe at any point in time, almost 100,000 sleeping rooms in terms of hotel supply. And what's really interesting, I think in all of the markets you'll see today from a hotel point of view, and I'm really curious to see how that also turns out for the alternative lodging, we will be looking at cities that run yearly occupancies well above 80% in a normal year, given, right? So those are cities that are highly compressed at all times, that really have a lot of rate management to do in order to really maximize the return. But what I really want to show, especially starting with a city like Paris, is that what we tend to do in hotels in general is that we look at performance as a very holistic metric. So if we look at a city, we say something like the average occupancy is this and that, the average rate is this and that. But actually a city and hotels within can behave very, very differently. And when Christoph already said in the very beginning, we are going to look at some of these demand figures, especially in the times we are in right now. I think it's important to really realize that a city really has almost little submarkets within itself. There are different segments of hotels within those submarkets, and they attract very, very different travelers. So a day in the city of Paris can differ completely from the next day. And that's even not talking about any crisis. This is really just the normal trends we see. So what we do at OTA Insight, and what I'm mainly in charge of, is really to look at these very dynamic demand patterns and see how we can assess these for markets like Paris, and see how demand basically shifts from one day to the next and what we can do with that. So I'll show you an example, diving right into Paris as a market. If you look at Paris, this is now not right now, these are normal days in Paris, running a high demand, right? So the redder the area, the higher the demand. So these are figures we basically collect OTA Insight through clickstream traffic, so searches into the city, and how we see the availability evolve over time. And this is the same city, right? But on the left-hand side, we're actually looking at a weekday in Paris. So you see the area around La Défense being very red, the airport area really being rather compressed. And on the right-hand side, you have in the same week, the same demand level, but it really hits the city center. So where most of the sites are, some of the upscale hotels, really not where the corporate business generally lands. And these are actually areas that during the week almost form like a whole. You see there around the 8th arrondissement. You almost have a demand hole during the week. And those are just examples I took. Obviously, events, local events or global events like we know now, really affect this greatly. But what I think is very interesting is how every day almost has its own demand profile. And depending on where you are located and what type of offer you have, you might literally be competing with completely different parts of your city over time. So this is basically how Paris would look on a normal demand day. Now, if we think about today is Monday. This is a business day. I don't think this is really high demand in Paris. But if we look at today from the perspective of, I don't know exactly when you guys started planning this session, but let's say it was January. So when we were still planning this, Paris would have actually still looked like this. So you can still see the business districts being rather in high demand. And as we go into February, you can see this really slightly vanishing. And now we're almost in a pool of blue. So really demand has, in the especially last 2 weeks, has completely vanished from the city. And when we look at the inbound demand, so this is quite a corporate day, right? So let's just focus on business searches, so travel intent into a city like Paris. You can really see that generally in a normal week. So let's say a month ago, you will get around 800,000 searches of travelers wanting to book a hotel in Paris. Already till the beginning of March, this is actually plummeted by more than 60%. I think this is actually the biggest drop we're going to see here today. And now we're mid-March, so this has almost gone down to absolutely nothing, which is rather appalling. And I wish I could share a better outlook. But speaking about outlook, maybe what's interesting to see. So we all know that it's not looking very good right now, right? So if I look into the next couple of weeks for a market like Paris, you can definitely see that there is very low demand the current month. Also April, even though there is Easter, it doesn't look very jolly. But what is interesting, and we will see this for the other markets in different forms and fashions, but it seems like there is no, we were also saying it actually before the session started here, Scott and I were having a brief conversation. There doesn't seem to be a collective panic in a way that people would cancel their trips really, say, for the rest of the year. The demand drops we see are really mainly due to travel restrictions, events being canceled for good reasons. But the further you go out, so what we see here is this kind of 8-week window that we seem to be chasing. So this is a bit where you see cancellations being very strong. This is where you really don't see a lot of searches because, frankly, no one can travel anymore. But when you go into May, it's I don't really want to say the words demand stabilizes, but let's say it is not, it might decrease a little bit. You will still see probably an overall decrease, but it is not, it doesn't look like this whole quarter is completely dead. And if we just focus at the bottom of the screen for a second, what do hotels do, right? This is also something we look a lot at OTA Insight. It's not only really booking intent and market demand at all, but if you look at the reaction of the hotels to these changes, you can see this blue area at the top of the graph. This is a data sample we have pulled out for Paris of a couple of hundred of users on our platform. And we have tracked how many of them have made a price change in the last 7 days. So these are percentages. And in red, you see in what direction this price change has gone and by how much. So for Paris, for instance, you can see that really now, short lead time, we do have around 60% of hotels that have made a price change at approximately minus 20%. And this is a trend you see for the remainder of March, going into April, and then it flattens out slightly. So as of May, there is discounting, but we're looking at around 10-ish% and maybe around 30% of hotels doing it. So I know we're always very quick to say things like, oh, in terms of crisis, let's keep our rates steady. But we also have to see that those were days that were potentially already quite compressed if events get canceled. The markets kind of have to adjust these rates back to a normal entry price. And it still looks like a lot, right? And this is something that's really interesting. When I first saw this graph myself, when I was putting this together, I thought, wow, this is a lot of hotels, this is a lot of discounting. But I can tell you when we come to the other markets, you will have a different perspective on Paris because it's still looking quite steady compared to some of the ones I've seen. I'd be really curious to hear also from Scott if those are figures he's experiencing for alternative lodging, because there must be at this point also cancellations or less intent to book, I would personally imagine.
Right. So just to remind everyone, there are people connecting now. Basically, today we're going to focus on 5 cities in Europe by looking at the trends based on price, demand, rate leakages, and so on. The cities are Paris, London, Barcelona, Amsterdam, and Berlin. And we look at those cities by 2 different perspectives. With Nadine representing OTA Insight, we look more at the hotels industry. With Scott representing AirDNA, we look at the data from vacation rentals. Okay, so we have the 360-degree picture, and I think this is going to be much more helpful for everyone. Right. Let's look at AirDNA now. Right. Let me get the Scott screen. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Nadine. Thanks for teeing that all up for me. So yeah, we're taking a little bit of a different approach. We're just going to jump into, what our actual product looks like. And for better or worse, the product wasn't really perfectly designed for a pandemic, but I think we'll be able to extract a few good insights from what we're seeing in the marketplace. I guess it'd probably be nice just to have a nice little baseline of, how the product looks, how is it organized. And this is basically an overview page that really anybody can come into around the world for free. You get everything in this overview page away. We know there's over 3 million individual short-term rental operators out there in the universe. And so we'd like to give them some basic insights on the market. So here in the Paris page, you can actually see some high-level stats on ADR, occupancy, and revenue. So we can see occupancy is also extremely high in Paris. Hotels showing 80%. We're showing almost 85% for the vacation rentals. You know, there has been significant regulation in the Paris market, which has reduced the number of properties. There used to be 48,000, and now there's only 34. So, you know, while supply has been reduced, demand hasn't gone anywhere for the market. We still see, you know, extremely high demand in Paris. You can see the fluctuations of how average daily rate, you know, June is going to be their best month, August is their worst. You see that in occupancy rates and revenue as well. So just thinking just a bit more about the product itself, you know, not all vacation rental properties are entire home properties. So we show how many private rooms and shared rooms are on the market. We show what channels these properties are listed on. And in Paris, it's dominated by the Airbnb marketplace. You can also see a distribution of the size of rentals, you know, how many properties we can say are hotel similar style properties. Studio properties are 6,800, one bedroom properties, 16,000. So the majority of the properties in Paris are going to be smaller hotel comparable sort of supply. And like we mentioned earlier, there was at one point 69,000 vacation rentals in Paris, and that is down to, you know, about 50,000 currently. I don't know specifically all the regulation, but I think what they try to do is push most of the vacation rentals out of the city center into some of the outskirts of the city. You know, the chart, the map might say otherwise, but there used to be a lot more that used to be right in the center of the city. There's a lot more just general information about how the market behaves and just a basic overview of the information there. But just to dive into the product itself, I mean, what we want people to do is actually see every vacation rental that's in the marketplace. So you can see this property, one bedroom property in the Luxembourg area, you know, was available for rent 283 days, average daily rate of 228, occupancy rate 74, and all those fun stats. So when we look at what are the trends, you know, our best place in our product to go to look at, like, what does the future look like? How is this impacting what people are doing right now for rates? And pricing that product is in our future rates section. And in this section, you can do a lot of things. One is you can filter for different areas within the marketplace. So we're just in that Luxembourg area, so we can go in here and see exactly what the rates look like in that market. We can see on any particular day, what is the demand, how many places are booked, how many places are available, and how are they pricing those properties. So we can see in these very light shaded blue or purple, whatever color you want to call this, you know, what is the demand on that day? And this is an algorithm that we've developed to help people, you know, understand, you know, even though, so if a date's like 3 months in the future, you know, occupancy might be low today. We built a lot of algorithms to figure out what would be the expected occupancy. How many people do we imagine are going to arrive over the next 3 months, and what do we expect the demand to be on that day? As you can imagine, in Paris currently, it's very low demand through the end of March. You know, we can see it all in the light purple color, and we see some demand returning in April, and most of the demand returning at the sort of mid-May. I think this ties pretty well to what Nadine was showing on the hotel side of things. So it seems like there is some communication there between the vacation rental market and the hotel market. Now, what gets to be more interesting is that when we look at, there were almost 40,000 properties. Actually, how many properties were in the Luxembourg area? Here, let me just X out of this and go to all of Paris so we have a baseline stat here. So we knew there was 40,000 properties that were in the marketplace. We can see on any single day how many properties are booked and available. So out of those 40,000 properties, only about 20,000 properties seem to be actually on the marketplace looking to accept reservations at this point in time. So we can say that 50% of the properties in Paris have said, you know, hey, I'm blocking my calendar for this month. I'm just not willing to take reservations. Of the 40,000, 9,900 have received a reservation, and you can see some stats on what those bookings look like. Paris being such a big market with such a good sort of distribution of leisure and business travel doesn't have a whole lot of spikes. Purple is the number of booked properties on a given day. And in most markets, you'll see, weekend spikes or event spikes on a daily basis, but demand seems to be, deteriorating through the end of April in terms of number of bookings, seems to be coming back right now in April and sort of slowly declining through the summertime. Now, like we've mentioned before, we're in unprecedented times. And so, some things that we wish we had better visibility into were things such as cancellations. We don't see as many, we didn't see as big of a drop with vacation rentals as we have seen from some of the data coming out of the hotel industry. We think that's for a multitude of reasons, but one being that vacation rentals have much stricter cancellation policies, often not having any refunds, within 30 days of arrival. And so we did not see that sort of 50% plus cancellation rate. But this week's a whole new week, and so we're still kind of waiting with bated breath to see what happens.
Thank you very much, Scott, for this, and Nadine as well. Very interesting stats. Of course, from the revenue management point of view, any rate drops, we advise obviously against that. Everybody knows that we shouldn't drop the rates. Many of us will remember 2008, 2009, the financial crisis. It's exactly what happened then. And those who have been longer in the industry will remember things like September 11 and even further back. Any demand drop, any consequential drop in rates, it doesn't help. It doesn't generate any more demand. You maybe can gain a teeny tiny little bit of market share in the short term from your competition. But the thing is, thanks to fantastic companies like yours, which provide rate intelligence, all your competition will know right away when hotels drop the rates. So rate drops, they're really absolutely pointless. It does not generate any more demand. It just cuts into the profit margin of everyone. And of course, it's a tough call, because at some point somebody will drop the rates, and the remainder of the market is going to follow. What I think is important, that in that situation we just try to maintain a little bit the normal kind of distribution and variances between your hotel and your competitions. So if you're normally pricing $50 or €50 or £50 above a certain certain competitor, well, then maintain this ratio as well, and don't price yourself completely underneath everyone else. Don't try to be the cheapest one, because the thing is, those people who will travel right now, they have to travel right now, or they choose to travel right now at any rate. So they will go to your 4- and 5-star property, paying rates that are way on the market value, or on the typical market value, let's say, but they will still have the same expectations. And that is, I think, a huge threat that we will have, because those travelers come to the high-level property and will have the expectations to enter now a 5-star property.
Your
I
microphone.
think Christoph got muted. Yeah. Enzo muted you, Christoph.
No. Yeah, now you're back.
Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, instead of being able to offer a high-level service with this lower rates, you now will probably have cut back in staff. You will have cut back in service, and the big issue is those guests who will come with high expectations, they will leave, and they will have a bad experience, and so they will leave bad reviews, and this will continue. So I think communication is extremely important right now, to say, this is an exceptional situation. this is what we are doing to provide great experience, and you know, try to minimize this impact as best as possible.
I think you're hitting on a very important point there, actually, just to add to that, because I think also the figures we've both seen, Scott and I, really show that this is a very different situation, right, from a, let's say, even 9/11, or what we had here in Europe, the terrorist attacks in Paris and Brussels 2017, where you would go into similar demand decreases, but that was really because people were fundamentally at that point afraid of your destination. So it was a very different situation here. We're more in this situation of people actually prefer they could travel, but they can't because of regulations and because they know they shouldn't, or because their events get canceled. But it shows that the fact that May and June still looks semi-normal, I do think we have an opportunity to, whenever we get this under control, to bounce back more quickly. And like you say, once I've dropped my pants, it's very, very difficult to get up to the levels I used to have. And that's something we should keep in mind, to be prepared for this to be rectified, hopefully rather sooner than later.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, it just is, we're in a place that's such an unknown right now. It seems like travelers are still optimistic about having summer travel. I think everybody's looking forward to getting out of their house at some point in time. And so I don't think anybody's willing to cancel their trips, or at least that's what the data is saying right now. So, I mean, but it is just unprecedented. We don't really know what's happening or when we can all sort of get out there and do what we want to do. But, you know, people are holding on to their vacation rental plans, as we're saying. And we even see people are at home and they don't, you know, they have a lot of time on their hands currently. And so, you know, we actually see some booking behavior that is, you know, late summer, even picking up on the vacation rental side of things, as people have more time to go around and look for their epic vacations online.
That's a really, really good point, Scott. People, they're at home and they have the time now to do their research and to do their dreaming. So the dreaming phase right now is, yes, I think, very, very pronounced. So we all know that the first two things many companies will cut in time of crisis is travel on the one hand, and which we obviously experience right now. And the other thing that companies will cut is marketing. And I think it would be a very, very bad mistake to cut marketing now from a hotel point of view. We needed to adjust it, obviously. It doesn't make any sense to promote short-term right now. But what we need to do is we need to target those people who are in the dreaming phase right now, and put content out there that addresses these travel desires.
Okay. Right, what's going on in London, guys?
What's happening in London? Oh, that's me. London. So what is happening in London? A lot is happening in London. First of all, London has, I think, our biggest supply of bedrooms out there. I'm actually curious to hear how that behaves together with the vacation rentals. And if I'm not mistaken, this year the city plans to even add about 8,000 bedrooms to that list. So are a lot of new openings, new upscale hotels entering the market in very difficult times. So let's look at the city, maybe how it would behave normally. London is big, right? So London has very, very distinct business areas versus leisure areas as well. So I picked out again 2 random high demand days that I saw in the future in London. And what you often see, this is rather typical for the city, I would say. I checked a lot of different days, and who knows London will be familiar, or who's been to WTM, will be familiar with the Excel area around Canary Wharf and the Excel Congress Center. So what you see on the left-hand side is really events taking place in this Congress Center, and all the transport links to that venue really lighting up with demand. It also hits the city a little bit. Also, we have this trend of half business, half leisure. So we do see that there are actually quite some people staying in the city center as well. But generally, you really see the demand being on the right-hand side of that map. Whereas on a leisure day, so again, that really depends also on what's going on. But what you see is demand generally shifting more to the West End. So you'll also see demand around the parks, around Knightsbridge, Kensington. And depending on the day, so I picked one here that had something going on at Wembley Park. So there directly you see a spike in demand if there's a venue that really drives demand outside of the city. And it could even be that due to the transport links, this is why the West is hot as well. So you can really see a clear distinction between a weekday and weekend, for instance, in London again. And now, same exercise. Let's look at today from the perspective of January. You see directly the business area is really hot. Then we see this demand slowly vanishing until we come to February. And now this is March. So the city has also lost a lot of big events already at this point in time, which have obviously hurt the, well, not only the demand, but also the current occupancy. So hotels are running around 30% right now, which is very difficult. And it's very challenging to know where the journey is going. So obviously, London is really a business destination, really strongly fueled also by conventions. I think it's the #1 meeting destination in Europe. And if you look at the GDS searches in a normal week, you would almost have, you're hitting 3 million searches in a normal situation. And now, beginning of March, again, already down 40%. And with the recent cancellations, we're looking at even less. So whoever is looking now is looking further out, or maybe busy changing the booking like we already discussed. But short term, there's very little. And I'm actually not even aware what the latest update has been on the UK travel restrictions. But since last week, I think a lot of countries have now really closed the borders, and a lot of flights have been canceled. So that's something we also see for a couple of markets just in a second. If you look at the outlook, so moving ahead from here out of this dead zone, it is a little more pessimistic than what we're going to see in other cities. So March, really quite dead. April, also what used to have the London Marathon, there's not really much left of that. And if you look at the rate changes, so this is, like I said, when we were looking at Paris, Paris is doing quite well. So here we're really in a situation where more than 80% of hotels have dropped their rates. And for the short lead time, it's up to 40%. So that's really a lot. And then it stabilizes around 25. And then we stay around the 15-ish, 10 until the end of May and into June. So that is a little bit more reasonable. But the very short lead times have seen quite a drop in demand. So that is quite significant. But again, probably also due to the fact that a lot of travel has been really canceled last minute. And the moment your rates are elevated to a certain level, you will have to at least, I guess, bring them down to a normal entry level, entry rate level, so people can book if they ever wanted to. So London as such, more aggressive with the rate changes. And also in May, I mean, you see still a couple of days here that I think on the 19th and 20th there of May, there were still events scheduled in the city that were canceled late last week. So also when you look at those and the evolution of demand, they still look busy here, but they are decreasing as well. So be curious to see how that looks at the end of the week. So that is how London looks like at this point in time.
Nadine, can you help me understand what the blue line is? I understand the red R is the price decrease. What is the blue area part?
This is really the percentage of hotels that have performed this type of price drop that you see. So now in this situation, you see this blue area going really above the 80% mark. So we're talking almost about the entire market, taking part in this discounting, if you will. Which also shows, how citywide this is really. So like what I was showing with the areas before, that is all nice, but in this situation, it's really almost everywhere where you're seeing this.
I have a quick question from the audience. Hi, Marco. How are you? Marco Montemagno is a very well famous and very well known person in the industry. Well, he's looking at the show and he was asking any suggestion for the forecast from June, for example.
Yes. I have a very controversial suggestion, which is almost called wait and see. I can really say, so on a positive note, I can say that for all the cities we're looking at today, if I look at June onwards, you actually still see semi-normal demand level. So if you go day by day, you will see there have maybe been a couple of decreases, but it really, at this moment, if I had to tell you today what's going to happen, I do not think your forecast that you have put in place would be impacted. But of course, we also know, and now you're going to use a really strange technique. If we know what has happened in China, we have seen how long it took until they got the virus under control. So that's something we have to account for here. I do assume, and I'm absolutely not a medical person, but we will still be busy with this month, probably next. It really depends on when we will get ahead of this curve, because as I said, and I think also Scott saw the same figures for the vacation rentals, the summer still looks rather normal, but with every day that passes, this window that you see decreasing here, let's say if we're looking at London, March, April, May, half of May, with every day that passes, this window gets pushed back almost with every event that gets cancelled. So it's very difficult to say. It will really depend on what type of restrictions we'll see in the next couple of weeks and how quickly we can tackle this crisis. I don't know what you guys think about it.
Any feedback, you, Christoph, as a revenue manager? We know you're based in Canada. Your clients are almost based there. How is the situation over there anyway in general? And what would be your suggestion regarding the forecast? We know that in short term is a very bad situation, but what about 4-5 months from now?
Yeah, well, we see from China now that numbers are looking a little bit less. What word should I use? Less scary, let's say. And they seem to somewhat start to get a handle on it. Now, what we need to keep in mind is this is China, and China has a very different, very far more drastic and aggressive approach to getting this under control.
Yeah.
Just think about, people were banned from leaving their homes. They were only allowed to leave homes on certain days, and then it was completely stopped. Police was patrolling the streets. They used drones to patrol the streets to make sure that there's nobody out there, and anybody well noticed by police, they would get a visit. We do not do that here, and even though if countries now start to realize that, and countries across Europe start to basically put a curfew in place, it is not at the same level as in China. In my home country of Austria, they have a curfew since today, but people who need to go to school can drop their children off. People who need to go to work can drop their children off at school. So how effective is that going to be? In Canada, the government fortunately was very proactive, and schools are closed for the next 3 weeks here in Ontario, for example. All public institutions, everything is already closed. So we can only hope that these measures help. I'm a little bit more pessimistic in regards to the US, because I don't see these drastic measures happening there right now. What that all leads to in regards to forecasting, I think that nobody can really know. Most people will wait and see. And one thing that we can do is we need to be very flexible in regards to our cancellation policies, and remember that we have our customers. We need to consider their customer lifetime value in a way, because at some point this will be over, and at some point people will come back. They will travel again, and we need to make sure that we can help them right now with what they need, so that they can take care of their immediate worries, and not need to worry about getting their deposit back and all these kind of things. After all, we're in the hospitality industry, so we need to be hospitable now, right? And of course, this is extremely tough for hotels, and many hotels. What I've seen, what they offer is, instead of charging cancellation fees, they offer credits for the future. Some hotels offer credit at a bonus. So instead of refunding the money, they offer 120%, 130% credit down the road if the people decide to not ask for their money back. And that can be, of course, interesting. There will be government help available, but yeah, for many businesses it will mean they're fighting basically for their survival right now to stay afloat. And in regards to forecast, I hope that in summer months this will be somewhat controlled, and I can really see that once the situation goes somewhat back to normal, that travel will spike, because all the travel that didn't happen right now, well, at some point it will happen, right? The people who traveled for business to a certain destination, well, they will have that trip later this year, hopefully, and then I can imagine that from a pricing point of view, there will be possibly even more compression in the second half of the year, and also in terms of marketing costs may even go up, while it is dropping right now in certain markets, and even OTAs are pulling back on their marketing spend, which leaves some opportunity for the hotels. I can imagine that it will be far more competitive in the second half of the year when everybody tries to somewhat rescue 2020.
It's going to be a very busy conference season later this summer, huh? You've seen all the people pushing their conferences from this month and next month into August. It's going to be, I think we're all going to be on the road every single day in August. So it's going to be a busy season for sure.
Look at London from vacation rental, Scott. What's your point? Should we get your screen?
Sure, yeah. Hopefully you can see it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, like the hotel industry, London is the biggest vacation rental market as well. 60,000 active rentals in that marketplace. And like Nadine said, I mean, it is a big market, right? So it's hard to paint anything with a large brush, but you can see some general trends where ADR is high and low. June's the best month of occupancy, generally a little bit lower on the vacation rental side, 74% occupancy over the last 12 months. Worst in January, best in June. We have this cool feature in the product where you can really compare all of the neighborhoods. I mean, we probably have a list of 100 different neighborhoods in London. And so sometimes it's helpful for people to really break down the city, understand, okay, there's 8,000, almost 9,000 listings in Westminster, average daily rates 233. And you can sort of see how all these markets really compare. We have a lot of investors on our platform too. They're trying to figure out, what does the hotel data look like? Where are opportunities to buy residential real estate in that market? So just kind of talk just more high level about about how to analyze the market. There's some really interesting insights in here. Where are people at 230 versus 167? Where is occupancy high or revenues per property higher or lower, which is interesting. I think
Sorry, Scott, can I just ask you one question on the occupancy? I think you said it before, but I think I missed it. Because of the nature of Airbnb, the occupancy you're referring to, this is actually booked, and it's not, let's say, off the shelf because the owner is in the house himself.
That's right. Yeah, and that's one of the most challenging things about our business is that the vast majority of vacation rentals that we see on, let's just say, Airbnb over the course of the year, that's not a full-time vacation rental. The owner may be there for 6 months out of the year, or maybe 1 month out of the year, or maybe he only rents it for 1 week while he's traveling to the US. And so that is one of the most difficult things. I mean, without getting too far into the weeds, the way that we have to think about that is that we make sure that a property, well, we have an algorithm that really determines whether that's an owner blocked date, which typically is blocked further in the future, which is usually longer in length, and we remove that from our calculations.
Okay.
We also just make sure that there's a lot of properties that were listed for the Olympics 4 years ago that are still on the platform, and so we do a lot of filtering to say, okay, this property is not responding to people, it hasn't had a booking in 2 months, so let's take that out of our occupancy calculations as well. So it is a bit of a different calculation, but we try to get it to a place of properties that are actively trying to be rented in that month to take our occupancy calculations.
Makes sense. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. That's a good question. I think one of the interesting things that we do on our site is really look at the full year seasonality. And this will be helpful to kind of understand what time looks like in a normal time period. And the red here would be low RevPAR days, and the green is going to be high RevPAR days. And so we can see, March typically isn't the best month in London. It's actually a fairly poor month in London, where really only weekends are decent or above average demand, the rest of the month being relatively low demand. You can typically see when big events are coming to town. You can see when the just general travel picks up around June and July as the weather gets better. And you can also see where it starts to drop off. Maybe, I don't know, October. You can see that there's, the weekdays are relatively red in nature, and that December, January are poor months. This is just the February that just happened. So this is, might be the anomaly of coronavirus, or it might be just February is typically a terrible month in London. But you can see last month, even though the impacts of coronavirus weren't until late in the month, we thought, this is definitely one of the worst months that we've seen in London. Well, it is the worst month in the last 12 months that we've seen in the London market. We started looking at the future side of the data. I think this chart's more telling typically. We didn't really mention the yellow bars here are what the available rates are for these properties that have not been booked. It's really tough to tell, I'd say, guys. Like, it's just, there isn't really much booking happening now. Look, there's 37,000 active properties, and there's 12,000 supposedly booked this weekend, right? I say supposedly because they're booked right now. They might come off the books now. I think one of the interesting things is that Airbnb, just as of Friday, said that they would allow guests to cancel reservations free of cost, free of charge. That means the service fee. That means they're forcing all the hosts to return in full all the money for these reservations. And so we would expect this week for a lot more cancellations to happen. It's something we're keeping a close eye on. Generally, when we look out into, May, June, we see this pretty much in every market we look at. I don't know whether people's understanding of when the virus starts to diminish in the summertime as the weather gets warmer, but it seems like as of June in most markets, it is business as usual. At this point in time, things are changing quickly, but that's typically how we see it, is that we're showing, still very high demand in June, which is London's best market. People are still optimistic about traveling in that time period. And so that's my brief synopsis on the London market.
Also, the big OTAs are now refunding, I think, just on that note. So just like Airbnb, I think Booking.com and Expedia have issued similar statements that they will refund even the non-refundable bit. That's not as prominent maybe for the hotel sector, but still, so similar measures are now in place indeed.
Interesting. Yeah, it's pretty contentious on the vacation rental side, because each of the individual hosts can set their own cancellation policy. It could be flexible, it could be very strict. And for the first time that we've seen ever, is Airbnb is saying, these are exceptional times. You are going to refund all of these, billions of dollars in reservations, and what the impact's going to be from the hosts that are sort of depending on that money and trusting on the platform to uphold their cancellation policies. I think it's the right move by the platforms. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's just what the backlash would be from the host community about them not having actual control over their properties and their cancellation policies.
Right. So I'm curious to know more about now Barcelona, Nadine.
Yes.
So we looked so far Paris and London. It looks like that they are not going so bad right now. Yeah. Let's see Barcelona.
Barcelona, so very different market in terms of size, right? If you look at Paris and London, we're definitely the biggest ones we will have discussed today. But Barcelona is also one of these recent, victims of over-tourism, right? So again, maybe interesting for the vacation rentals in a second, running really high occupancies. And if you look at Barcelona, generally also as a market, the way the city is made up, if you compare this to Paris and London, which are rather widely spread, and you can really see where business districts sit. Often almost you feel like it's outside of the city in some cases. If you look at Barcelona, this looks all a little bit different. So on the left-hand side, again, you would see a weekday. So you see it being very red around Les Corts. I'm probably not saying it right, but this seems to be the business district in the city. And you often see this being the most booked or the first booked neighborhood in the city on a normal high demand day during the week, whereas during the weekend, well, like we know, demand shifts further to the coast, to other sites, and further up the coastline. So this is a typical comparison you would see for a business day and leisure day in Barcelona for a normal year. And if you look at today, so again, now March is not necessarily the most high season month in Barcelona, but Monday is still a business day. So if you look at a Monday in March, you would still expect a little bit of business around Les Corts, around the business area. But as we proceed, also Barcelona being the very first city actually that has had one of these major cancellations with Mobile World, that was, I think, I don't want to say, I don't want to go as far as saying this was a historical moment, but I don't think anyone really expected that something like this would even be an option, that you would cancel events of this scale. Then ITB in Berlin followed. We're still going to discuss Berlin. So I think this was really a wake-up call. And as of that, obviously demand in Barcelona has taken quite a hit. So in terms of business, again, this is generally also in the weekends more of a leisure destination, but the GDS traffic has really, again, also plummeted by more than 50% only at the beginning of the month. So this was just after this famous cancellation of Mobile World. And when you look at the outlook, so in terms of, well, the glimpse of hope we seem to be after in this session. So March and April really still seem to be experiencing very low demand, including Easter and the weekends that you might have thought could already show really demand in Barcelona. So at the end of April, typically. Then if you move into May, starting with the long first weekend of May, you do see a bit of demand that is still steady. But I'll say but. So if you go into these individual days, like I've done in preparation for the session, especially this first weekend that you think, oh, it's a long weekend, there must be something there, has also already decreased. So it still looks quite nice. But I do think that in the next weeks, depending on what happens, we will probably see a further drop for those weekends as well. But what is interesting for Barcelona, and I would say this is good news. Christoph might like it, maybe not as much as he would like to see it, but so when we look again at the number of hotels or the percentage of hotels that drop rates for the next couple of months, if you look at the blue chart, so this is again around 80%. So we're talking about the majority of the market really making these changes. But the spikes you see, so this is the first city of its sort that has these real demand, these real decreases up to 60% of rates. So this is really generally if there's been an event that has been recently canceled. So where already rates were out in the market that were a lot higher than they would usually be. So it's not that they are necessarily discounting off their normal price to really undercut any value proposition. This is generally really them repositioning themselves to a normal level in the market, because obviously also if you were selling suites as a hotel, you're not going to continue doing that if everyone cancels, right? So there we have a Champions League match, I think it's Barcelona, Napoli, some music festival. So this is really where you have these spikes. And this is something we've also seen in Berlin. So I'll show you that in a second as well, where really the biggest drops are really for events where compression was already very, very high in the market and the entry rate was high to begin with. The rest, yeah, I mean, we're still dropping, right? We're still talking about 15-ish%, but in May, this level's around 10, which I think is not as bad as it could be. Don't know what Christoph thinks about it, but it seems to be very event driven for Barcelona and very targeted for those type of days.
Yeah, it's very interesting data to see that the peak of the drops is during those peak periods with high compression, as you said. If I read that data correctly, there seems to be even an increase in rate. Or
in June, yes,
so
yes.
that is really interesting to see that. Do you have any explanation as to what is going on during that period of time? Why would the rate come back up here?
So it's something I've seen in, I think, even Amsterdam, in Berlin, if I'm not mistaken. So that really seems to be the very, very first week of June, where, well, around 4% of hotels have increased the rates. That is not maybe a whole lot, but still there is a little bit of hope. So it could be that the hope is bigger than anything else. But in any case, don't seem to be a lot of cancellations. They still seem to be getting potentially 1 or 2 bookings. There's no specific event I can pick up now from the data as such. But it is something I think we'll just see also for Berlin and Amsterdam, if I'm not wrong. So it really seems almost like May is this magical border where we right now see the drop, and June there's the hope it will be back to normal, and people are at least yielding normally in line with what they would usually expect. So it's indeed good news.
What I really like about graphs like this is it really goes to show how important it is to really carefully examine the data and look at it in detail and drill down. Because if all I hear is 80% of hotels drop rates up to 60%, that is, of course, a complete nightmare. And if I just have this information as a general manager of a smaller property, maybe, and I'm going to say, oh my God, I have to drop the rate by 60%. But that's exactly not what's happening, because this is really on specific periods only. So yeah, just goes to show how important it is to really fully understand the data, to be able to drill down to the smallest possible level and truly understand what is going on. Fantastic graph, Nadine.
Scott, you have an office in Barcelona, right?
We used to. Now everybody's working from home. Yeah, no, we've got we have about 30 individuals out there. A lot of our sales team, customer success, a lot of folks are in Barcelona. It seems like a pretty grim situation. I think only supermarkets are open momentarily, so everybody's holed up in their homes. So that is a pretty recent development. It's pretty hard to imagine people going to hotels when they can't even leave their homes. Who knows what's going to happen out there and elsewhere. I do have a team. It's one of the reasons, jumping over to my data, I mean, we looked at Mobile World Congress because it was one of the first events canceled, like Nadine mentioned. We really want to see what the impact was on the vacation rental market there. And we did, we saw that typically where there's, 100% increase in revenue in the market across Airbnb, we didn't really see much of a lift at all from World Congress this year. That might be a bit of a no-brainer, but, generally it's generating over $2 million in the first couple of days. It was, almost half of that during the event. And so this is the most interesting thing that we saw impact across the world is these big events, are really what drives a lot of the demand, a lot of people extending those business trips into leisure trips as well. And that was, the only thing we can see is February as being a big impact across the industry. It was really around events. I did want to bring up this blog. So it is something we published on Friday. And it is something that's been picked up by 200 publications over the last few days. It's really our attempt to analyze and update, every single market around the world. We have a lot of interactive visuals here in this blog post. Sorry if I'm scrolling too fast to see anything of interest. We understand we're looking at how cities are being impacted differently than destinations. And we see that destinations seem to be, holding up a lot stronger than cities. We see where reservations are dropping off in some of the major markets and see what the percentage decline is. But I think the most interesting thing, is what we're really looking to do is, give away a lot of data for free in this time. Everybody's really hungry and desperate for some information on where the market's going, where it's headed. So just for
how can people? Sorry to interrupt you, Scott. How can people get in touch with you and get those data for free?
That's exactly right. So just come to our site, airdna.co.co, go to our blog, and then you'll see, the first blog there will be this coronavirus analysis. So every week we plan to update this. This will be updated in a couple of days. This is updated as of Wednesday of last week. So you'll be able to see, how revenues are trailing off. We'll be able to have pretty much every city, every country in the world in these charts. Let me get to another one. So you can see kind of, are people still booking travel? How many confirmed reservations are happening across major markets? And so we're really doing our best job to have really high level information about real-time booking activity, and revenue and what the summer looks like and how it's unfolding week by week. So stay tuned on that. Come to our blog to check out some free information there. I think when we're thinking about the information, I think Nadine's information and ours are better. Her visualizations are cooler. So I think we're seeing the same sort of thing. It's really, Barcelona is a very spiky demand market. You see a lot of weekend demand, and it always trails off during the week. So it's definitely more of a leisure market than a city market. We're only seeing 7,000 properties, almost 8,000 properties that are actually available for rent on a daily basis. I think that's an important metric to look at when there's typically 30,000 properties available for rent on a given day here. So this market's quickly drying up as people are pulling their properties off the websites or blocking their calendars. You'll see occupancy still looks high. That's just because people are removing properties that haven't been booked or are removing their listings altogether during the time period. Now, what does the recovery look like? Our demand score is the best indicator of that. May still looks weak. June looks okay. I think, what we see is, maybe July is being the time frame where we're seeing still relatively high demand compared to the rest of the 6-month time period. So that's the quick analysis on Barcelona. I know we've got a couple more to get through. So
I have one quick question for you, Scott, just out of curiosity, if you know that, because you just said that there are quite some homeowners that pull their properties off the platform, which makes sense, right? You don't want to, I guess, have someone in your house during these times. But do you know, actually, this is just a random question, for a city like Barcelona, how many of these homes that are on the platform are actually really homes? So someone who would really be concerned to maybe rent out a room versus these super hosts that have a lot of apartments that they just rent and they could actually keep on renting them without, a lot of impact if they wanted to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm thinking real quick if there's a place to see that in our stats. Typically we don't really hone in on like a professional host versus an average homeowner renting out their home. I think anecdotally, the way that the Airbnb market has evolved is that most properties, they will start off as somebody's maybe second home or somebody's home, and then they move in with their girlfriend and it becomes their full-time Airbnb home. And so what we see is a slow evolution of, what used to be sharing their individual, houses is now more of a commercial operation, for better or worse. It is just the nature of how this market's evolved. And so that the majority of properties are full-time vacation rentals. There are obviously the differences. And when you look at a private home, because regulation has made it really expensive to get a license and to afford a home that can be a full-time vacation rental, you see a lot of private room rentals, right? Mm-hmm. 8,300 in the market is extremely high, especially as a portion of total rentals, 43%. And so what it forces people to do is sort of, create an extra bedroom in their property. And so that's a really high number in the marketplace. So I hope that answers some of your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Right, Nadine. It's the turn of Berlin, right?
Berlin, we're on to my home country. Drum roll.
Are you from Berlin?
No, I'm German, right? So, I'm just happy, like a German city. Hamburg didn't make it onto the list for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe next time. So Berlin is a really interesting market. I think it's been the most up-and-coming market probably that we're going to cover here today because it has really gone through a big period of growth in terms of occupancy and ADR. But it will also be the cheapest one we will discuss today because the prices in Berlin, I don't know if you've ever if you've been recently or ever, even for upscale hotels, it is just very cheap. So we're still at yearly ADRs, just roughly around a little bit below 100 euros, which is really not a lot for a European capital. But it's also because, if you look at the supply, here we have more than 50,000 sleeping rooms. If you compare this to what we had in Barcelona or else what we have in a city like Amsterdam, there's just a lot of supply. And the mid-scale segment is very, very strong. So it's really a very different market, the way it operates. And I don't know how well you know Berlin, but the city itself is also it is actually rather compact. What I was showing you before, in terms of demand split between weekday, weekend for London, Paris, even in Barcelona, where you had this business district close to the city, but it was still there. In Berlin, it is a little bit more mashed up. So what I pulled out here as an example is really a day during the week where it's busy during a fair, right? This is where ITB usually is. So if you have an event there, this will drive demand into those areas in the city. But otherwise, the business districts are rather incorporated into the city, which leads to, I would say, Berlin is really the city with the most unpredictable demand patterns I've actually seen from all the markets. It really changes and on a small surface, but it still evolves very rapidly. And then during the weekend, you clearly see demand rather pulling around typical shopping districts, typical sites in the city. This is what you find to be more in demand. But like I said, if there is no event outside, this can also easily overflow. So from one neighborhood to the other, you do see quite a vivid exchange of demand between one and the other. And equally, just like Barcelona, I think the moment Berlin woke up to this crisis was when ITB got canceled. I was already at the airport when that happened, and I could basically watch the demand decrease in our tool instead of going to the fair myself, which was a tragic moment. But if you look at today, so normal Monday in March in Berlin, what you would see is you have quite some demand throughout January, February, really forming in the city, really getting strong until this moment when travel restrictions are being put in place and the demand really just kind of vanishes. And really overnight, you almost have nothing left. In terms of search volume into the city, also, again, we have less than 50%, more than 50% decrease month over month. Generally, in a normal week, you will get probably around 300, 400,000 searches into a city like Berlin. But now it's really, really down. And if we look at the outlook, you can probably say that Berlin, now we're always talking about what's ahead, right? Everyone knows now March is down. I don't have to, repeat it again. I think there's no market today where it's going to be up. But you do see that May is still sticking to its guns. Also, if you look at the rate decrease, like we saw for Barcelona, Berlin is also rather spiky, right? So you do have about 75% of hotels actually changing their rates. But it is really more, again, also during days that have had an event on the books. So we had weeks, for instance, there 22nd, 23rd of April. Just now, some medical congresses have canceled right before I pulled this data. So they used to be bright red. Now we're at this mediocre-ish pinkish color. The German Filmpreis is going to be awarded or should have been awarded on the 24th. So you still see the aftermath of some of these high demand periods, but they're vanishing already at the end of April. And then we move into May. 1st of May weekend still looking quite okay. And the city still, out of all the ones we've seen, this is probably the most positive outlook we have seen. And also in terms of rate drop, again, as of May, I'm just checking. Actually, we see decreases up to 10%, not much more than that. So again, just as a reminder, we sit on much lower rates in Berlin, right? So that's also to be taken into consideration, but still, and see, Christoph, there also you have in June even some that again increase the price by a little bit, so a bit of normal yielding seems to be taking place again, which I guess is again a good sign, as good as it can be these days at least. Though also to be taken into consideration, I don't know exactly when it happened, Germany has just announced that they've closed all borders everywhere. So that might still hit in these figures. I do not think this is fully in yet as an effect.
Yeah, I think that we will see the situation change by the minute sometimes. Scott, what is your take on Berlin?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, jumping into Berlin. Yes, like you mentioned, yeah, it's definitely a more affordable city to get into. You can see some of the basic demand trends here.
Very similar average daily rate. So it was 99 from the hotels, 95 with vacation rental. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah,
Line. Yeah. So
yeah, that's correct. And so when we look at sort of average daily rate, so I'm going to get into some historical data here. So we can look at the rates for the market historically. We can see typically in, let's just call it more of this summertime, maybe the average daily rate's about $100. So not really a lot of fluctuation. It seems to be relatively flat across the winter and summer months. And so like Berlin is a bit of a unique market like that. There doesn't seem to be incredibly dynamic in terms of the rates. So let's look at like what it looked like last year to what it looks like this year. I mean, we're still seeing the same rates, right? We're still seeing, maybe a little bit lower here in March, where the average daily rate of a book property is $94, $96 instead of 100. We're still seeing the same rates coming into, April and May, right? It's a pretty, if I say so myself, a boring market from a demand side of things or from a revenue management side of things when it comes to vacation rentals in that market. I think it's just really tough to talk about like what's going to happen or prognosticate about what's going to, when it's going to bounce back. It's just, with what's happening with travel restrictions, it's just really hard to tell. I mean, looking at what we see in the market right now, it, at face value, doesn't look like there's anything crazy happening. But again, 5,000 properties that are available for rent on one of the major platforms. That I forget what the total number is in Berlin. Sorry, I'm going to bounce back here. Out of 13,000 properties that we saw in February, right? And so I think that's the interesting trend is out of 13,000 properties, that really only 5,000 are available to be rented. In terms of trying to find some hope in the forecast, again, I mean, it looks like June, it starts to bounce back and people are still, have some, and July is going to looks really strong in this moment in time. So yeah, that's the quick read on the Berlin market.
Do you think, out of curiosity, do you think that Airbnb or vacation rentals, like if you compare them to the other cities like London, Paris, Barcelona, would you say they have a harder time in Berlin just because hotels are so cheap and there's so many of them, that it's harder to, I don't know, form a value proposition to the traveler?
Well, Berlin was one of the hottest markets there for a long time, and typically what we see is, well, there's a lot of things in play. I think local real estate in Berlin is also very cheap, especially in East Berlin. You can find some really, really good deals, right? And so still in, juxtaposition to what a hotel cost at $100, you get there's a good profit margin in between getting a 3-bedroom property out there and being able to make a good profit. But that is definitely part of the equation because people are looking for, cheap real estate, cheap multi-family real estate or residential real estate, and expensive hotels. Mm-hmm. So you see the quickest growth of the alternative accommodations is really where that is happening. And you'll see, people buying up condo complexes or buying homes, because there is such a great disparity between what a home costs and what a hotel costs is where often you see that initial explosion of short-term rental properties.
Perfect.
Right. So we got the last city, one of my favorite city worldwide, guys, Amsterdam.
Let's make it count.
Scott, I know that you will have to run. Maybe we can start with Scott this time. He's in a little hurry.
Yeah, the world's falling. Got a business to run here, but yeah, I got to run a bit. But let me just show you real quick what I'm saying about Amsterdam market. So looking at this in real time with you, so bear with me. So we're seeing average daily rate about 191. We see, what you'd expect from a market in this sort of climate. Nice spring and summer market dips, quickly into the winter time. 9,200 active rentals in the marketplace. Again, one of these markets, regulation is a big piece of vacation rentals performance and how they look and where they exist. So just keep that in mind when looking at these analytics. Amsterdam used to be, one of the darlings of the vacation rental industry, and now there's like a 90-day cap on how many days you can rent a property in Amsterdam. That's the latest regulation I can recall in that marketplace. Typically, when that happens, you see a lot of private rentals where there's not as much regulation in the marketplace. Let's do quickly on the future rates, see if we see anything interesting what's happening in Amsterdam. Amsterdam seems to, from our data, to be one of the markets where this hasn't happened in any other market, where April still seems to be strong. We're showing 65, 68% occupancy on the Saturday evenings in Amsterdam. So this is one of the strongest recoveries outside of March that we've seen looking at these different markets. Generally, out of the 19,000 properties, there's only, that might do it, there's only 4,000 properties available for rent. So only 20% of the properties are actually still on the platforms. Like I said, this stuff is just evolving every single day. So that's an interesting data point for the market. Like we said, we never designed the product thinking about, 80% of the supply being pulled from the marketplace, or that cancellation rates were going to go to a crazy rate as they are. So that's where I'm going to is my product meeting right after this to figure out how we better capture, cancellations and this sort of demand behavior in our product moving forward.
That's a really cool initiative, because there's an enormous amount in boosting revenues through cancellations. Maybe not in this current period, but typically by better understanding the data behind cancellations, we can oftentimes really change things and generate significant impact on the revenue for the business. So good luck for the meeting. Keep us posted.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for joining us, Scott. Let's connect in the next coming days. I will share with you all the feedback from the live session. And really, thanks for sharing those great stats. And looking forward to have you on board on the next show, man. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for having me, guys. Sorry I got to run early, but it's a pleasure to meet you all. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Scott. So, Nadine, let's have a look at Amsterdam.
The last woman standing. Exactly. Amsterdam, so Enzo's favorite city. I don't think he's the only one who says that, because Amsterdam is running occupancies that other cities can probably just dream of. And it's probably one of these cities also that don't even exactly know what low demand really means. But when you look at the city of Amsterdam, so with all these vacation rentals in it, you still see clear demand patterns if you look at a weekend versus a weekday, for instance. So even in Amsterdam, where you think it is all bright red all the time, there are differences. So for a typical business day, what you will definitely see is that there is quite some business heating up in the southern part, whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, but this is a typical trend you would see. Whereas for the weekend or for the leisure periods, it goes more into the city center, the upper part there on the right-hand side. And again, Amsterdam is also rather event-driven. So obviously the occupancy tourism is very, very strong, but still there are a lot of events that will help this demand spike even more. And we will see in a second also what that means in times like this. It's quite a drastic. Amsterdam is going to be the most drastic market I think we will look at today. So if you look at today, just at the beginning of this whole period, you could still see, again, the business district was spiking. So there was quite some activity. It was heating up there around this Amsterdam South area. And then as time progresses, this really vanishes with all the cancellations. So now we have a low demand situation everywhere. And also for Amsterdam, again, more than 55% drop in search intent, so in volume. And what that means for the outlook is really that, well, March is obviously flat. What you see in Amsterdam, which you didn't see in Berlin, is that some of the weekends still look rather reasonable in April. So what you what this market really shows is that there has been a very steep decline for the current month, beginning of next, but then April, May look quite okay from what we know today. But why this is interesting is because when you look at the rate changes that we have seen as an answer to those demand levels that hit the market, you can actually see that you have a couple of really, really strong spikes. So there, about 90% of the properties mid-end March have changed their rates and dropped by about 75%. Now, this is, I think that's a record. I don't know if that's a good record to set, but again, on a positive note, those were days really that had events going on. So there were events such as Building Holland. There were some other events in the city that were all canceled. So again, we came from a day that was highly compressed, where very high prices were on the shelf, and we had to regulate this again. Then it really, in terms of what we have here, April, we're already below the 20% mark. In May actually doesn't have so much price dropping at all. This is why I say it's the city of extremes. You really have the hardest spike at very short lead time, but then it really seems like we're waiting it out. So the window of impact here seems to be actually the shortest for this type of market, which is interesting. If you look at May, it looks actually quite normal. And it's one of the only markets, I think, where the vacation rentals, now Scott is gone, can be more expensive than the hotel rooms themselves, which is quite an achievement. But again, it's quite a small city, so it doesn't have as much supply. So there, the rates can be a lot stronger than, for instance, in a city like Berlin.
Yeah, it's a fantastic city. Has so much to offer, and I had the great possibility to attend a few conferences there. I remember the first conference, it was a revenue management conference, and I thought, why do they put the revenue management conference in the peak period?
That's indeed a good question. That can be quite pricey indeed.
Yeah. So understanding the demand a little bit better, well, there is not much outside of the peak period. It always peaks.
Exactly.
So yeah.
It's a very new situation for them to find themselves in. I can imagine something that market is not particularly used to. Yeah, so, which is maybe also why it is so heavily, let's say, discounted at the very, very short lead time, and no one really does it yet further out, because it's just nothing they have really worked through before, potentially.
I see people, today very on fire, commenting in, people are watching from different city this live show today. The truth is that everyone is trying to get some suggestions, some feedback. The funny thing is, I see here people connecting from for example, country like Italy, and the situation is already bad since long time, including strong restriction and red zone area close to the traffic, and and some other cities still open. So there are people, trying to get some tips and tricks from people already in this crisis stage. And there are people in some other city where there's not restriction yet. So that's fun to look how the world is, progressively, changing now from a city to another one. Of course, it's not easy to provide a suggestion in this situation, guys. Let's be honest. There are people asking, do you have any suggestion for June? Any suggestion for now? Well, the truth is that there is no crisis predictable. But of course, what you have to learn, guys, is that this situation that this is not the first and not the last, probably. Sometimes we had terrorist attacks. Sometimes it's an earthquake. Now is a virus. So you have to take this in account now. You have to put this kind of unpredictable situation in your strategy always. My suggestion is to, of course, once again, empower yourself with tools such as Auto Insight, AirDNA. This way, you have more information in your hands, and not wait until the end, to react, but have some, big data able to provide some interesting insight, looking at the forecast now in the next 6 months. So if you have an issue, you can predict something. Of course, again, virus is not time you can predict and you can react easily, especially because people are getting those restrictions everywhere. So it's not a point of dropping down rates. The problem is that people are not traveling at all. They are forced to stay at home in some case. In some other, are free to travel, but of course they prefer to stay at home, not get any risk. I've seen one interesting comments that make me think here today. It was made by this guy working at X Hotel. Um, I think Norbert. He was thinking, look, so it's true that everyone now is saying, okay, do not drop the rates. Dropping rates is not making demands. We all agree on that. But he was point out something interesting, and he was saying, actually, guys, of course, nobody want to drop rate here, but I think you have to take in consideration to slightly reduce your rates in the next months, because the problem is not only the virus situation. People is not traveling because the virus is there. They feel scared to get infected. The problem is that people are getting a strong impact economically. There are thousands and 100,000 of people right now. They are not earning money, or their salary has put on hold, or they're closing their activity, and in somehow they may feel to travel anyway in the future, but they will have a less power. And it's not only one person is getting this issue. A lot of people from many countries now are facing the economical, you know post-virus infection crisis. So if I want to travel, and on the other hand, I don't find place that are matching my pockets, which is different from the pockets I had planned last year. So it's in some point it was not wrong, the comments of Norbert. So we seriously need to redefine the price, not dropping down the rates dramatically, but in some point we have to face that people in the future will have less power, less money to spend for travel, especially for leisure travel. I won't say business. They will keep going around and do the business people event will start back again, I wish. But the big slice of the tourism industry, I'm not sure, but probably is coming from the people travel for leisure. And if I have less, spend money, hey, you have to take this in account in your revenue strategy. What do you think, Christoph?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And as hoteliers, we are, I think, the first in line to have experienced that when people don't travel, rooms won't get cleaned, housekeepers will be laid off, and I think that maybe in Europe it will be possibly a little bit easier. But I can imagine North America looks very different because unemployment benefits and things like that are very different over here. And yeah, it is oftentimes those people who will need the income the most who will now not have it. And the question is, will they be able to afford traveling? Um, I I think you're absolutely right, and Norbert is absolutely right that when things go back to normal, we will have to carefully assess where we need to price ourselves and where we will be able to price ourselves, and that's where revenue management will come in, and and we can only speculate right now what that is going to look like. What is important is that we prepare, that we are ready, that we stay on top of things, that we make sure we have the data available, that we will need to take those decisions, that we monitor our demand, we monitor our market, and yeah, we will once travel will resume. we will evolve back into a business as usual, whatever that will look like in the future.
Right. Any takes from last from you, Nadine, before we close?
On the particular question or in general?
Oh, general, in general.
In general, well, yeah, I can just really second what has already been said. Also, in terms of the situation we're in, I think it is something that it's really unheard of. It's very new. It's something that really everyone is in together. I mean, it's not only our sector. There will be almost every second person will have something to do with the aftermath of this. And I do think that the situation, once it's resolved, will leave us with maybe a different reality to what we're used to. But I can only agree with Christoph. I think the only thing we can do right now, obviously there are always like people who have smart advice. I have to honestly say I've never been through a crisis like this. I wish I could give a really, really smart piece of advice at this point in time.
Nobody has.
No, yeah, probably nobody has. And I think the only thing you can do is indeed stay on top of your situation, assess when the market bounces back, see what segments are coming back. Because of course, budget to travel is one thing, but we might see also a shift. And this has happened before, also with with terrorism. We've seen in Europe how people have chosen maybe more domestic markets where maybe the airfare won't be needed. So we might have less budget, but you might be able to spend it on a similar scale of hotel. So it's very different to assess what's going to happen. We might see a shift of geographic segments that we didn't have like this before, but the only thing we can do is really know what's happening, be on top of it, and act accordingly. And I think this is also a good opportunity for us as well. I also used to be a revenue manager, so I say us as revenue managers to work together for once with our commercial departments to make sure we target the right people, to make sure we have the right offers on the shelf already during the inspiration phase, like we said, and really form a strategy together, which goes beyond just simply price changes. This might be an opportunity to foster this cooperation.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Having the right offers on the shelf, maybe something that hotels should consider right now. Anyone who has packages available right now that include things like museum tickets in markets where museums are closed, or anyone who still has non-refundable rates out there, it's probably a good idea to close that for the time being. So yeah, make sure you have the right products available, and sit down and think about what new products can you develop right now for the current situation in those markets where travel is still an option, but especially for when business is back. What can you do? What new products can you bring to the market for when things come back?
All right, guys. I think we went very good. A lot of visualization. A lot of people was really interested to look at those data. I think we should plan some other cities at this point because we showed on only 5 cities
and only Europe, right?
And only Europe. I mean, and in particular, I didn't share anything about Italy, which is my country and which is the worst country right now in Europe. Anyway, so we can plan another session. Let's connect in next coming days, Nadine and Christoph. If you are available, I'll be more than happy to do so. All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for watching, and let's meet again Thursday. I have one more session, woman, with Rita Varga. Friday again with Simone Porto on digital, and there will be also Christoph again as a live manager, moderator, and supporter of Funnel TV. Thank you, guys. Have a great evening, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.